What keeps a person attached to an avoidant is rarely the relationship itself. Relationships end every day, and although endings bring grief, grief eventually follows its natural course. Something else occurs when an avoidant withdraws. The attachment begins to survive independently of reality. The mind continues building a connection long after the connection itself has become inaccessible. Many people assume this persistence proves the depth of their love. Yet from a psychological perspective, the intensity of longing often reveals something far more complicated. The avoidant becomes the stage upon which unconscious forces begin acting out an older drama. I have often observed that human beings do not fall in love only with people. They fall in love with possibilities. They fall in love with unfinished stories. They fall in love with the image of what another person could become if only certain barriers disappeared. This tendency becomes especially powerful in relationships with avoidant individuals, because avoidants reveal just enough to create hope while withholding enough to sustain fantasy. Their emotional distance creates empty spaces, and the psyche instinctively fills those spaces with meaning. The individual waiting for the avoidant to awaken emotionally is often waiting for something larger than emotional reciprocity. They are waiting for a transformation. They imagine a future moment when the avoidant finally understands what they have lost, finally recognizes the depth of the bond, finally abandons fear and embraces intimacy. This imagined scene acquires extraordinary emotional power because it appears to promise resolution, yet the promise is deceptive. The mind is no longer attached to what exists, it has become attached to what might exist. The deeper one enters this fantasy, the less reality matters. The avoidant's actions become secondary to the story unfolding within the imagination. Months may pass without meaningful change, yet hope remains alive because hope is being sustained internally rather than externally. Every small sign becomes evidence, every memory becomes proof, every coincidence becomes a message. The psyche begins constructing a narrative designed to protect attachment from reality. At this point, projection becomes the central force maintaining the bond. Projection occurs whenever qualities hidden within the unconscious are experienced as belonging to another person. The avoidant appears uniquely valuable, uniquely meaningful, uniquely capable of providing fulfillment. Yet what is often being perceived is not solely the avoidant, but aspects of the self that have not yet been consciously integrated. The more unconscious these qualities remain, the more powerful the attachment becomes. Many people assume they miss the avoidant. In truth, they are frequently missing the version of themselves that appeared in the presence of the avoidant. They miss the hope they felt. They miss the anticipation. They miss the emotional intensity. They miss the dream that life was moving toward a moment of completion. Because these experiences became associated with a particular person, separation creates the illusion that the person took something essential away. This illusion gains even greater strength when childhood wounds are involved. Human beings do not enter adult relationships as blank slates. They carry emotional histories, unmet needs, forgotten disappointments, and unresolved longings. Whenever a relationship activates these hidden layers, the emotional stakes become disproportionate to the circumstances. The avoidant may appear to be the source of the pain, yet the relationship is often functioning as a doorway into much older experiences. A child who learned that affection was inconsistent may unconsciously become fascinated by inconsistency in adulthood. A child who felt unseen may become drawn toward individuals whose attention is difficult to obtain. A child who learned that love required earning may experience pursuit as proof of devotion. None of this occurs consciously. The individual believes they are choosing a partner. The unconscious is often choosing a familiar emotional environment. Because these wounds operate beneath awareness, the avoidant acquires symbolic importance. Their emotional unavailability mirrors an older absence. Their distance resembles an earlier distance. Their reluctance to connect reawakens ancient questions about worthiness and belonging. The adult mind interprets the experience as a relationship problem, while the unconscious experiences it as an opportunity to finally solve an unfinished emotional conflict. This is why people become trapped waiting for an emotional awakening from someone unavailable. They are not simply hoping for reconciliation. They are hoping for redemption. They believe that if the avoidant finally chooses them, understands them, and remains present, then an older wound will finally disappear. Yet no human being possesses such power. The avoidant cannot heal what existed before the relationship began. The shadow plays a crucial role in maintaining this attachment. Every individual possesses aspects of themselves that remain unrecognized, denied, or neglected. These hidden qualities form what I call the shadow. In relationships, the shadow often reveals itself through intense emotional reactions. The longing that seems directed entirely toward another person may actually conceal disowned aspects of the self seeking recognition. One person discovers that beneath their pursuit lies a profound fear of abandonment. Another discovers a terror of loneliness. Another uncovers an overwhelming need for validation. These experiences remain hidden while attention stays focused on the avoidant. The pursuit becomes a distraction from self-confrontation. As long as the avoidant remains the central problem, deeper questions remain unexplored. The tragedy is that the fantasy appears noble. It disguises itself as loyalty, patience, understanding, and devotion. Yet beneath these admirable qualities there may exist a refusal to face reality. Reality demands mourning, fantasy offers postponement. Reality asks us to accept what is. Fantasy encourages us to wait for what might someday be. Many individuals spend years suspended between these two worlds. Outwardly they continue with life, yet inwardly they remain psychologically connected to someone who has never fully arrived. Their emotional energy becomes trapped inside an unfinished expectation. They continue waiting for a moment that exists only in imagination. No contact begins transforming the psyche because it interrupts this entire structure. When communication stops completely, the projections lose their source of reinforcement. The fantasy no longer receives constant nourishment. The mind initially resists this interruption because it experiences withdrawal. Every attachment creates habits of thought, emotion, and anticipation. When those habits are suddenly deprived of stimulation, discomfort emerges. Many interpret this discomfort as evidence that no contact is failing. In reality, it often signals that the process has finally begun. The psychological system is being deprived of the material it relied upon to maintain attachment. The absence of contact forces attention away from the avoidant and toward the internal mechanisms sustaining the obsession. During this stage, loneliness frequently intensifies, yet loneliness must be understood correctly. Most people assume loneliness results from lacking another person. Often it results from lacking a relationship with oneself. The silence created by no contact removes distractions and exposes this absence. What initially appears frightening gradually becomes informative. As the weeks pass, something remarkable begins occurring. The avoidant slowly loses symbolic status. They cease functioning as the imagined holder of fulfillment. Their humanity becomes visible. Their limitations become visible. Their inability to provide what was desired becomes visible. Reality gradually replaces projection. This process liberates enormous amounts of psychic energy. Previously, that energy was invested in analyzing messages, imagining futures, interpreting behavior, and maintaining hope. Once the attachment weakens, that energy becomes available for development, creativity, relationships, and self-discovery. What felt like loss begins revealing itself as recovery. Differentiation emerges from this recovery. Differentiation means recognizing where you end and another person begins. It means understanding that your emotional value does not depend upon another person's capacity for intimacy. It means accepting that someone else's limitations are not a verdict on your worth. This recognition marks a profound shift because the individual stops organizing their identity around another person's behavior. The ultimate purpose of no contact is therefore not distance from the avoidant, but proximity to oneself. Every projection withdrawn becomes a piece of the self reclaimed. Every fantasy surrendered creates room for reality. Every moment spent facing loneliness strengthens the capacity for genuine connection. Eventually, the silence that once felt unbearable acquires a different meaning. It is no longer experienced as rejection, it becomes initiation. The absence that once controlled the psyche becomes the very condition through which consciousness expands. The avoidant remains who they are, yet their power diminishes because the unconscious forces that magnified their importance have been brought into awareness. What disappears is not merely attachment but illusion, and in the space left behind, a more authentic relationship with oneself can finally begin. A profound misunderstanding exists at the heart of human suffering. Most people believe freedom arrives when the avoidant returns, when explanations are finally given, or when the relationship reaches the ending they once imagined. Yet genuine freedom begins much later, at the moment you realize their silence is no longer the central event of your life. For a long time you believed you were waiting for them. In truth, you were waiting for yourself. You were waiting for the day when your identity would no longer depend upon another person's capacity to choose you. Individuation begins when the unconscious bargain finally ends. No longer do you ask what must happen for them to understand me. Instead, a different question emerges. Why did I need their understanding in order to feel whole? That question changes everything because it turns attention away from the avoidant and toward the hidden structures within your own psyche. The energy once spent analyzing their behavior becomes available for self-knowledge. This is why no contact reaches its deepest purpose only at the end. Not because the attachment disappears overnight, but because the person who carried it begins to change. The avoidant remains who they are. Their story remains their responsibility. What transforms is your relationship to the story. The silence that once felt like abandonment becomes a teacher. The absence that once felt like punishment becomes an invitation into greater consciousness. Eventually you discover that the goal was never to make them stay. The goal was to become someone who no longer abandons themselves. And on that day, their silence loses the power to define your life, because you have finally become the author of it. When an avoidant person disappears, most people believe they are suffering because someone they love has become distant. Yet that is rarely the true source of their anguish. What torments them is not merely the absence of another human being, but the strange power that absence acquires over the imagination. A message not received becomes more important than a conversation that actually occurred. A future that never arrived becomes more vivid than the present moment. Day after day, the mind circles around the same questions, searching for an explanation that always seems just beyond reach. Why did they pull away? What are they feeling? Will they return? The tragedy is that while these questions appear to concern the avoidant, they slowly begin to consume the one who asks them. A relationship may have ended, but the psychological attachment remains alive, feeding itself through uncertainty, fantasy, and hope. I have often observed that what imprisons a person is not reality itself, but the meaning they unconsciously attach to reality. The avoidant withdraws, and immediately the psyche begins constructing explanations. One imagines hidden feelings, secret fears, unfinished stories, and future reconciliations. Every memory is examined for clues. Every silence is interpreted as a message. Every passing day becomes evidence for one theory and then another. Gradually, the avoidant ceases to be a flesh and blood individual and becomes something far more dangerous, a psychological symbol. They no longer exist merely as a person who left. They become the imagined holder of answers, healing, validation, and completion. This is why so many people fail to understand what is truly happening to them. They believe they are fighting to preserve love when in reality, they are fighting to preserve an image. The relationship may have contained affection, attraction, and genuine connection. Yet once the avoidant retreats, something deeper often awakens. Old fears emerge from hidden places within the psyche. Fear of abandonment, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough. The avoidant appears to activate these fears, but their origins are much older than the relationship itself. Many individuals attempt to solve this suffering through contact. They reach out for closure, explanations, reassurance, or understanding. They tell themselves that one final conversation will allow them to move forward, yet each attempt often produces the opposite result. The wound remains open because contact keeps directing attention outward. Instead of confronting the turmoil within themselves, they continue searching for relief in the very person whose absence activated the turmoil in the first place. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to transform uncertainty into obsession. Whenever something remains unresolved, the psyche instinctively seeks completion. This tendency serves us well in practical matters, yet in relationships, it can become a trap. The avoidant rarely provides the certainty that the anxious mind desires. Their distance creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. The imagination rushes in to fill the empty space with stories, possibilities, and emotional projections. What begins as longing gradually becomes fixation. At this point, a dangerous misunderstanding takes root. One begins to believe that contact will reduce suffering. Every urge insists that another message, another attempt, another conversation will finally bring peace. Yet the unconscious does not work in such a straightforward manner. Each attempt to regain connection often reinforces the very attachment one hopes to dissolve. The psyche learns that relief must come from the avoidant, and because relief remains unavailable, the craving grows stronger.
Okay, what many people call love is sometimes an unconscious struggle against separation.
They're not merely seeking another person, they're attempting to escape the anxiety that person awakened within them. This distinction is crucial because it changes the entire problem. If the pain originates solely from the avoidance behavior, then the avoidant must become the solution. If the pain originates from an unconscious wound exposed by the relationship, then no amount of contact can heal it. Whenever someone repeatedly returns to a source of emotional distress, hoping for a different outcome, we encounter a phenomenon that psychology has long recognized. The psyche recreates familiar experiences, not because they bring happiness, but because they feel psychologically unfinished. A person may consciously desire freedom while unconsciously pursuing repetition. They revisit the same dynamic again and again, hoping that this time the story will end differently. The avoidant often becomes the perfect partner for such a cycle. Their distance stimulates pursuit. Their inconsistency stimulates hope. Their emotional ambiguity stimulates projection. Because they reveal so little, the other person fills the empty spaces with personal fantasies, desires, and expectations. Much of what is loved is not necessarily who the avoidant is, but what the psyche imagines them to be. Projection plays an especially powerful role here. The qualities we long for most intensely are often placed upon another individual without our awareness. We imagine that they possess the security we lack, the certainty we seek, or the emotional fulfillment we crave. As long as this projection remains active, separation feels unbearable because it appears that something essential has been taken away. In reality, what has been lost is frequently a reflection of parts of ourselves we have not yet recognized. This explains why contact keeps the wound alive. Every message renews the projection. Every interaction restores the fantasy. Every glimpse of the avoidant revives the unconscious belief that they hold the answer to our suffering. The attachment survives not because contact heals the wound, but because contact prevents us from fully seeing it. No contact, therefore, serves a purpose far deeper than most people realize. Its value is not strategic. Its value is psychological. By removing the constant stimulation, the unconscious pattern gradually becomes visible. The attention that was endlessly directed toward the avoidant begins to return inward. The fantasies lose some of their force, the projections weaken. The uncomfortable emotions that were previously covered by pursuit finally emerge into awareness. Many resist this process because it initially feels worse rather than better. Without contact, there is no distraction from the emptiness, uncertainty, or grief that lies beneath the attachment. Yet this discomfort marks the beginning of genuine transformation. A wound cannot be healed while it remains hidden beneath endless attempts to escape it. The critical question is not why the avoidant withdrew. The deeper question is why their withdrawal acquired such immense psychological power over your inner life. Until that question is confronted, contact merely feeds the cycle. Once that question is faced honestly, a different path emerges, one that no longer revolves around changing the avoidant, but understanding the unconscious forces that made their silence feel impossible to bear.